The first sound I heard in Willowbrook Estates was the hiss of a lawn sprinkler cutting through the dawn. Not birds, not neighbors chatting, just that metronome of artificial perfection, the kind you only find in neighborhoods where appearances matter more than people. I was behind the wheel of my Ford F-250, the truck that still smelled faintly of diesel and old work boots. In the passenger seat, my 16-year-old daughter, Sophia, leaned against the window with her headphones on. She'd been silent since we left Denver. That silence had become her armor in the 2 years since the divorce, a way to shield herself from the war zone her parents created. The truck turned into Sycamore Drive, where every house looked copy-pasted. Manicured hedges, vinyl siding that gleamed under the sunrise, and mailboxes standing at parade rest. For a moment, it felt like we were intruding on someone else's movie set. "Looks fake," Sophia muttered, pulling one earbud out. I grinned. "Yeah, like Pleasantville." She didn't laugh, but she didn't put the earbud back in either. Progress. The house we bought was at the very end of the cul-de-sac, a brick ranch with a sagging basketball hoop out front and a detached garage big enough to be my sanctuary. It wasn't much, but after 2 years of custody hearings, lawyers who billed by the hour like vampires, and selling off every asset I'd built, this place was more than a house. It was proof we'd survived. As I turned off the ignition, Sophia whispered, almost to herself, "It's not terrible." That was the first time I'd seen her smile in months. Just a flicker, quick as a match strike, but enough to burn away the exhaustion in my chest. I climbed out of the truck, stretched my back, and let the morning air wash over me. It smelled of fresh-cut grass and charcoal from last night's cookouts. On the surface, Willowbrook Estates radiated peace. A place to start over. But beneath that polished quiet, something in the air felt brittle. We were still unloading boxes when I heard it, the sharp staccato of high heels striking pavement. Click-clack, click-clack. It wasn't a friendly neighbor stroll. It was purposeful, predatory. I looked up and saw her. A woman in her late 40s, trim as a razor, dressed in a beige suit that probably cost more than my truck's down payment. Her blonde hair was pinned back, so tight it looked painful, and she clutched a leather binder against her chest like it contained state secrets. She didn't walk so much as advance. Chin lifted, eyes scanning our driveway the way a general surveys a battlefield. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, though I hadn't introduced myself. Yeah, that's me. I'm Karen Beton, president of the Willowbrook Homeowners Association." Her smile never touched her eyes. "We need to talk about your truck." I glanced at the Ford, still covered in streaks of dust from the road, with my company's name, Sullivan HVAC Solutions, painted proudly on the door. "What about it?" Her expression flickered with disdain, the kind that could sour milk. "Commercial vehicles are not permitted in residential driveways. It's against our bylaws." I almost laughed. "Lady, I've been here 3 hours. My coffee isn't even unpacked." Karen's heels clicked twice as she shifted her weight. "I'll give you until tomorrow to correct the violation." She handed me a paper that wasn't paper. It was a notice printed in fine legal font with bolded sections about fines and enforcement. Sophia, standing on the porch with a box of her books, frowned. "Is she serious?" "Deadly serious." Karen's eyes swept across my property like a scanner, pausing at the garage, the gutter, the basketball hoop. "We have very high standards here, Mr. Sullivan. I hope you'll respect that." Then, without waiting for a response, she turned and marched back toward her BMW, heels clicking like a metronome of menace. That night, after Sophia fell asleep on her mattress, surrounded by unpacked boxes, I sat at the kitchen table with a beer and spread out the entire HOA covenant binder. My Army engineering training drilled one habit into me: document everything. Never trust authority at face value. The document ended at section 1.7. Nothing, absolutely nothing, about commercial vehicles. Karen had lied to me on day one. It wasn't about a truck. It wasn't about rules. It was a test. And whether I knew it or not, I'd just been drafted into a war I didn't start. By the second week in Willowbrook, I realized Karen Peton didn't believe in coincidence. Every interaction felt orchestrated, like she was following a script she'd written years ago, and I was just the latest actor shoved on stage. It started small, fines that materialized in my mailbox like bad omens. $75 for improper vehicle storage. $100 for non-compliant landscaping. Each notice came printed in official-looking language, signed with Karen's looping cursive that reminded me of a forged signature on a bad check. Sophia would find them before I got home for jobs. Dad, another one. She dropped the envelope on the kitchen counter like it was radioactive. The worry in her voice cut deeper than the fines themselves. I told her not to worry. But late at night, when she was asleep, I'd sit in the garage staring at those papers stacked like a deck of threats. My hands itched to tear them up, but my training whispered, document everything. The neighborhood itself was deceptive. On the surface, Willowbrook was friendly. Kids pedaling bikes down perfect sidewalks, retirees watering lawns, weekend cookouts perfuming the air. But once Karen's shadow touched us, the friendliness cracked. Neighbors who'd waved on moving day now avoided eye contact. One woman actually crossed the street when she saw me walking my dog. Another started pulling her blinds shut whenever I passed. Sophia noticed too. She tried to laugh it off, but I could see the way her shoulders hunched when she walked to the bus stop. She'd never admit it, but she was scared, and that scared me more than anything Karen could write on paper. The real explosion came at the HOA meeting. I'd never been to one before. The community center smelled of disinfectant and resignation. 12 people scattered across plastic folding chairs in a room built for 100. Karen sat at the front table, a gavel at her elbow like a weapon, binder open like a general's war plans. When I raised my hand about the fines, she didn't even look up. Mr. Sullivan, I've been enforcing these covenants for 8 years. If you don't like our standards, perhaps Willowbrook isn't the right fit for you. Her voice carried the smugness of someone used to crushing dissent before it could crawl. The room stayed silent. Not one neighbor spoke up. Some avoided my gaze, others studied the floor. Hostages, too, scared to challenge the warden. I left that meeting with my jaw locked, so tight it hurt. It wasn't just about my truck anymore. It was about control. She had built a kingdom out of fear, and I was her new project. That night, Walterchin knocked on my door. I'd noticed him before, an older man with shoulders that hadn't quite stooped despite the weight of age. He carried a folder thick enough to choke a filing cabinet. She tried the same thing with me, he said, voice gravelly but steady. Back in '92, we sat at my kitchen table while he spread out decades of documentation, fraudulent violations, harassment letters, even financial records he'd pieced together. His hands trembled as he tapped the papers. She's driven out families for 30 years. Always the ones she thinks won't fight back. Minorities. Single parents, veterans on fixed incomes. You're just the latest. Sophia hovered in the doorway, listening, her face pale. I wanted to tell her to go upstairs, but I didn't. She needed to hear the truth. Walter's eyes hardened. Son, if you don't fight, she'll ruin you. If you do fight, be ready. She doesn't stop. The next morning, I installed cameras. 4 of them. High definition, night vision audio. One pointed at the driveway. One at the porch, 2 on the garage. Cloud backups. Motion alerts straight to my phone. Sophia watched from the steps. You think she'll come here? I tightened the last screw on the bracket and forced a smile. She already has. She didn't smile back. 2 nights later, my phone buzzed at 2 a.m. The driveway camera. I rolled out of bed, heart hammering, and pulled up the feed. Karen's BMW idled at the curb, headlights off. She sat in the driver's seat, staring at my house. Not moving, not leaving, just watching. For 40 minutes. Sophia slept through it all upstairs. But I sat at the window in the dark, my coffee gone cold, and knew one thing with absolute clarity. This wasn't about rules or bylaws. This was war. It happened on a Tuesday morning, the kind where nothing feels wrong until suddenly everything does. Sophia was already at school. I'd spent the dawn crawling under a rooftop unit, knuckles scraped raw, when I climbed into my truck and pressed the brake. The pedals sank halfway to the floor, spongy and wrong. I froze. Military training hardwired one truth into me. Machines don't lie. If something feels off, it is. I killed the ignition, slid out, and crouched beneath the chassis. Oil-stained gravel bit into my palms as I traced the brake line with my fingers. Cold steel, until suddenly it wasn't. My hand slipped into air where steel should have been. A clean slice. Hydraulic fluid dripped onto my wrist, warm, slick, metallic. It wasn't wear. It was an accident. Someone had cut my brake lines. My stomach turned to lead. My first thought wasn't myself. It was Sophia. What if I'd been driving her to school? What if she'd been in the passenger seat when the brakes failed on Highway 85? My throat tightened with a kind of rage I hadn't felt since combat zones. Not the quick flash of anger, but the slow, volcanic kind that simmers and waits for eruption. This wasn't harassment anymore. It was attempted murder. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside was a threat. Every creak of the house made my body jolt awake. I sat in the garage with the lights off, watching the monitors from the new cameras. The green glow painted my face like a soldier in a war film. Hours ticked by. Midnight. 1. 2. At 2:14 a.m., movement. Karen's BMW rolled into view, headlights dead. She parked in the shadows across from my house. Through the grainy feed, I could see her silhouette, rigid, staring straight at the house. She didn't get out, didn't move, just sat there, watching. And I understood this was psychological warfare. She wanted me rattled. She wanted me sleepless. She was succeeding. The next day, I drove to the police station with a folder of documentation thicker than a Bible. Fines, surveillance stills, fake violations, and now the brake line photos. Detective Sarah Wilson listened carefully, her pen scratching across a notepad. She had the calm eyes of someone who'd seen too much to be easily surprised. "This isn't just HOA harassment anymore, Mr. Sullivan," she said. "It's stalking, possibly attempted homicide." But without direct footage of her tampering with the truck, she shook her head. "It's circumstantial." I wanted to slam my fist on the table. Instead, I leaned forward. "Detective, she's escalating. She's watching my house at night. My daughter's at risk. If you wait for more evidence, it'll be too late." Wilson studied me for a long moment, then lowered her voice. "Then document everything. Don't engage. Don't give her an excuse to flip this on you. You want her in prison? Patience and proof. Nothing else will hold. Patience. Proof." I walked out of that station with those words echoing like a curse. 2 days later, the twist I hadn't expected knocked on my door. It was Daniel, Karen's son. 19, lanky, dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in weeks. He kept glancing over his shoulder as if she might materialize behind him. "Mr. Sullivan, I need to talk." His voice cracked on the last word. I let him in, poured him water, and waited. He gripped the glass with shaking hands. "My mom, she's losing it. Last night she said," he broke off, swallowing hard. "She said she was going to solve the Marcus problem permanently." My blood ran cold. Daniel dug into his backpack and slid out a small digital recorder. He pressed play. Her voice filled my kitchen. Slurred from wine, venomous all the same. I cut his brakes. "I'll do it again if I have to. That man doesn't belong here. I'll make sure he disappears." Daniel's face crumbled. "I can't keep protecting her. She's my mom, but she's not who she used to be. She's dangerous." For the first time since moving into Willowbrook, I wasn't just angry. I was afraid. Not for me, but for Sophia. For this kid sitting across from me, broken by the woman who was supposed to protect him. The war had officially changed. It wasn't just about fines or trucks or even property lines anymore. It was about survival. The morning after Daniel's confession, I stood in my garage staring at the recorder on the workbench. Her words replayed in my head, jagged shards cutting deeper each time. "I cut his brakes. I'll make sure he disappears." I'd been in combat zones, faced enemies with rifles and explosives, but this felt worse. At least in war, you knew who the enemy was. Here, the enemy wore pearls, drove a BMW, and waved politely to neighbors while plotting murder. The attacks didn't stop, they multiplied. Monday, 3 violation notices in my mailbox. Unapproved drainage. Improper shed structure. Trash cans visible from the street. Tuesday, 2 clients canceled service contracts. "We heard rumors you're under investigation," one said, voice apologetic but firm. Wednesday morning, Sophia came downstairs pale and trembling. "Dad, someone was outside my window last night. I saw a shadow." Her voice cracked. and that broke me more than any sabotage. I walked her to school myself, scanning every passing car, hand resting on my tool belt as if it were a weapon holster. I wasn't just Marcus Sullivan, HVAC contractor. I was Marcus Sullivan, bodyguard. That week's HOA meeting was gasoline on the fire. Karen presided at the front, her smile stretched too tight, eyes glittering with something manic. I sat in the second row, folder of evidence under my arm, pulse drumming in my ears. When the floor opened for comments, I rose. I want to discuss financial irregularities in HOA expenditures. Karen's head snapped toward me like a hawk spotting prey. Mr. Sullivan, this is not the time. I dropped photocopies on the table. 3 years of landscaping fees. No landscaping done. Consulting fees paid to companies that don't exist. Over $20,000 unaccounted for. The room shifted. Neighbors who'd avoided my eyes for weeks now leaned forward, murmuring. Enough, Karen snapped, banging her gavel. If you don't like how things are managed, you can leave Willowbrook. Her voice cracked. For the first time I saw it. Not control, but fear. I smiled, thin and sharp. I'm not going anywhere. The silence that followed was the sound of walls collapsing. For the first time, her authority wavered. That night, retaliation came swift. At 3 a.m., my cameras caught her, heels clicking against pavement, a camera in one hand, clipboard in the other. She staged photos, trash cans she dragged into the street, a hose uncoiled that I'd wrapped tight the night before. Fabricated evidence to bury me. By dawn, the photos appeared in my mailbox, proof of violations that had never existed. But here's the thing about liars. They forget about the truth hiding in plain sight. My cameras caught her entire performance in full color. I laughed, but it wasn't joy. It was survival. Still, the pressure mounted. By Friday, insurance dropped my business. Saturday, the state board called about complaints filed against my contractor's license. Monday, a hospital canceled a $15,000 contract. She was dismantling my livelihood piece by piece, using lies as weapons sharper than blades. Sophia found me in the garage, head in my hands. Dad, we can move. We can go somewhere else. Her voice was soft, pleading, and it tore me apart. She deserved safety, peace, normal teenage worries, not this. But running meant Karen won. Running meant every family she destroyed stayed destroyed. I looked at my daughter, her eyes too old for 16, and shook my head. No, baby. If we run, she'll just find another family. It ends here. She didn't argue. She just hugged me, her small arms locking around my chest, grounding me. For the first time since this began, I let myself break. My tears soaked in her hair as I whispered, I promise you, we're going to end this. 2 days later, Walter knocked again, folder even thicker. Behind him stood 3 other families. Their faces carried years of exhaustion, but their eyes burned with something I hadn't seen before. Hope. We're with you. Marcus, Walter said. Whatever it takes. It wasn't just my war anymore. It was all of ours. And Karen? She didn't know it yet, but she'd already lost. The night it all came crashing down. The air felt electric, like a storm waiting to break. Sophia was on stage at her school's auditorium, her voice trembling through the final lines of our town. I clutched the program in my lap, forcing myself to smile for her. But my phone buzzed against my leg, a message from Daniel. She's in your workshop. Bolt cutters. Camera. Hurry. For a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. My business, the contracts, the client records, the equipment, everything was in that workshop. But more than that, it sat 50 feet from where my daughter would be sleeping in 3 hours. The rational part of me screamed to leave, to sprint across town, to catch her in the act. But then Sophia's voice cracked on stage. Raw, fragile, beautiful. She deserved one curtain call, one moment of joy uncorrupted by the nightmare outside. My hands shook as the audience applauded. I clapped until my palms stung, pretending everything was normal, pretending I wasn't counting the seconds like a bomb timer. When we got home, I didn't need Daniel's warning. The back door to the workshop hung half open, lock mangled, metal shavings scattered like glitter on the ground. I pushed it open and froze. Karen stood inside, her designer heels sinking into oil-stained concrete. rifling through my files with surgical precision. A canvas bag bulged at her feet, insurance forms, client contracts, even Sophia's school schedule stuffed inside like loot from a burglary. She didn't flinch when I spoke. "You're done, Karen." Slowly, she turned, eyes wild, hair sticking to her forehead with sweat. Gone was the polished HOA queen. What stood before me was something feral, cornered, unhinged. "You don't belong here, Sullivan," she hissed. "People like you ruin neighborhoods. I am protecting Willowbrook. Protecting property values. By cutting my brakes? By stalking my daughter?" My voice cracked, rage scraping my throat raw. Her lip curled. "If that's what it takes." For a heartbeat, silence. The hum of the fluorescent light. My own pulse pounding in my ears. Then, red and blue lights washed across the walls. Detective Wilson's voice thundered from outside. "Karen Peton, step away from the files. Hands where I can see them." Karen froze, eyes darting like a trapped animal. She reached into the bag, maybe for papers, maybe for something worse, but within seconds officers stormed in. The clatter of handcuffs snapped through the workshop, sharp as gunfire. Karen shrieked, thrashing, her voice breaking into a banshee wail. "This is harassment. He set me up. I run this community." But the cameras had already captured everything. Her rifling through my property, her stuffing stolen documents into the bag. Months of recordings, Daniel's confession, Walter's files, all of it converged in this moment. Sophia stood in the doorway, eyes wide, clutching the frame with white knuckles. I wanted to shield her, to hide the sight of Karen dragged into the night like a rabid animal. But part of me knew she needed to see it, to see that monster's fall. 2 days later, the community center was standing room only. 47 neighbors, some trembling, some furious, all carrying the weight of years spent under Karen's thumb. I laid the evidence out like a prosecutor. The embezzlement records, the doctored photos, the break-line photos, Daniel's recordings. And then I pressed play. Her voice filled the room, slurred with wine but unmistakably clear. I cut his brakes. "I'll do it again if I have to." The silence that followed was absolute. Then, one by one, the neighbors began to speak, stories of fines, harassment, threats. Families driven out, children targeted, dreams poisoned. Finally, Mrs. Rodriguez, whose wheelchair ramp had been called a violation, stood and shouted, "We're done with you, Karen." The room erupted. Shouts. Applause. Years of fear cracking open into fury. Karen, sitting cuffed at the back with 2 officers flanking her, tried to rise, tried to shout them down, but her voice was drowned by the sound of justice echoing off cinderblock walls. In that moment, I understood something profound. This wasn't my fight anymore. It belonged to everyone she had ever silenced. And together, we had won. 6 months later, the workshop smelled of cedar and machine oil again, not fear. My tools were back on the wall, contracts neatly filed, cameras still rolling but gathering dust. Life had shifted in ways both small and seismic. The court sentenced Karen to 4 years in state prison, restitution exceeding everything she'd stolen. Watching her led away in an orange jumpsuit didn't feel triumphant. It felt hollow, like looking at the ruins of a house that once terrorized the block. But the silence she left behind, that was priceless. Willowbrook began to breathe again. Neighbors who once crossed the street now waved from porches. Children played tag without parents watching windows. The HOA, stripped of Karen's grip, voted in a new board. Transparency became law. Open books, open meetings, decisions made in daylight instead of whispered threats. Walter called it the neighborhood's rebirth. I just called it normal. The transformation was slow, imperfect, but real. And for the first time since moving in, Willowbrook felt like home. Sophia changed too. She no longer slept with the lamp on. Her laughter returned, sharp and bright, bouncing off the garage walls when she helped me tune an old motorcycle. Sometimes I caught her watching me, eyes lingering longer than before, as if waiting to see whether I'd break again. I never did. One evening, as we sat on the back deck, cicadas buzzing in the trees, she said softly, "I'm glad we stayed." I turned to her. "Me too. What I didn't say was this. She carried me through it. Her resilience became my anchor, her presence my reason. The war with Karen had threatened to consume everything, but Sophia reminded me why I fought in the first place. And then there was Daniel. The boy who betrayed his own blood for the truth was no longer a boy. He enrolled at Colorado State, studying criminal justice. I met him for coffee before he left. He looked lighter, though scars still traced his face in the form of shadows beneath his eyes. My mom always said she was protecting the neighborhood, he told me, stirring sugar into his cup. But I think she was just protecting herself. From being powerless. From being ordinary. I let the silence settle before answering. Power built on fear isn't power. It's rot. And rot always collapses. He nodded, eyes wet but steady. Thank you for helping me see that. Watching him walk away that night, I thought about legacies. His mother's would be one of destruction. His could be one of rebuilding. I never sought revenge. What I sought was safety, truth, dignity. But revenge came anyway, wrapped in the sound of a gavel, in the click of a cell door shutting, in the way Karen's name became a warning whispered in HOA meetings across the state. Justice, when it finally arrived, wasn't loud. It was quiet, like the soft click of a fence gate closing. Like my daughter sleeping through the night without fear. Like neighbors laughing at a block party under string lights where tension used to live. One Sunday, Walter and I stood shoulder to shoulder at the community festival, kids chasing balloons while a local band played off-key rock covers. He lifted his paper cup of lemonade and said, "Son, you didn't just beat her. You changed how this neighborhood lives." I looked out at the crowd. Families smiling, strangers talking, people no longer afraid of each other, and realized he was right. Karen had tried to burn this place to ash. Somehow, all she did was make it bloom. That night, after the festival lights went dark and the laughter faded, I walked the property line one last time. The fence we built stood firm where her stolen driveway once intruded. I rested my hand on the wood, solid and unyielding, and felt something stir in my chest. Not triumph, not anger, just peace. The kind of peace you only recognize after surviving a war. I glanced back at the house, our house, and saw Sophia's silhouette in the upstairs window. She waved once before closing the curtain, and in that simple gesture, I knew the war was over. For good.